All right, we'll go ahead and talk about building our behavior intervention plan. So, back to our original subject, we're talking about a student who I have called Tommy and renamed on our data sheets as Tommy to maintain confidentiality for the student who I am talking about. So, um, Tommy, if we remember his behavior of concern, from the FBA. Again, this was just copied and pasted directly from the FBA. So since it specifically says behavior of concern identified in the functional behavior analysis, I took that information directly from the FBA. So I'll give you just a second to read through that quickly and refresh your memory. All right, so before we get into the behavior intervention plan, I want to talk about the interventions that were put in place for Tommy. So, for part of the intervention, Tommy was when we talk about materials and organization, let's start there for that first area that we monitored. So, the intervention phase is what we put in place is we had a checklist for organization in Tommy's planner. So for every class, he had a list of the materials that he needed to bring to class. And then at the end of every day, he met with his ELP teacher, Mrs. Vanderschaff, and they went over what work he had still to do that he would be expected to work on that evening for homework. And then the work would be put on his clipboard. So that was a contributing factor to the independent success that we saw in that materials and organization piece. So when we looked at that data in the FBA, we saw that that materials and organization piece looked pretty good and it was increasing over the 3 weeks. That would be why, because of the intervention data that the intervention that we put in place. So with those interventions, he was successful. That again tells us that with that intervention in place, we didn't really need to build a specific goal around that because we were able to get him to exhibit the behavior that we wanted to see in the area of organization. For time management, that's when we put in place that the teacher would work with Tommy in order to kind of estimate an appropriate time frame in which he should complete his work. So we talked about a trigger being put on the clock. So when Tommy's told you have only 2 minutes to get this assignment done, that's when we see his anxiety rise and we see more pushback from him as far as compliance and doing his work. So the intervention put in place was that the teacher would work alongside Tommy to determine an appropriate time frame or a reasonable time frame in which work should be completed. That could be broken down into chunks if it was a long assignment. So, for example, the first question that should take you 3 minutes to complete. Once you're done with that, we'll go on to the next question and we'll set a reasonable time frame for that as well. So with the teacher working alongside Tommy, that was an intervention that was put in place. And we started to see some good things there, not fully consistent yet, which led me to believe that we need to keep an eye on that task management as well as the task completion. Because if he's using his time management skills and working towards completing assignments, then we should also see that increase as well. Since the task completion area really did not show much improvement from a start of 33% to 36%, tells me that we're on the right track, but we need to do some more specific work in that area. And then finally, that emotional regulation piece. So here, Tommy started to actually attend social skills. He attended that 4 days a week for about 25 minutes a day, where we worked on specific skills such as emotional regulation, responding to an adult when you're frustrated. He's very good at recognizing his emotions. So, just how do we then handle or respond to those emotions that we're feeling? So that was the instruction that was put in place. Within that social skills instruction, we also worked through some of those executive functioning skills as we mentioned before. So, how to prioritize tasks. We looked at checklists and Talked about how to prioritize work by due date. We also talked about how we could prioritize work by the time we have to work on an assignment. For example, we talked about, if you have 20 minutes before dinner time and you have to look at your work, finding a work assignment that you could complete within that 20 minutes so that he would be able to complete something and feel successful. So, those are the various skills that we worked on during our social skills instruction during that intervention time. And after that intervention period, we determined that yes, there was a need to build a behavior intervention plan. So remember, not all FBAs lead to behavior intervention plans. Sometimes we complete a functional behavior analysis, we put interventions into place, and those interventions work well. Sometimes they do not, and we need something more specific, or the intervention that we put into place works, but it's so specific and so individualized that we need a plan to actually map that out. And then the last part of that is that we have that piece of reinforcement. So, what we started doing with Tommy is implementing a tally system in which he could trade in tallies for computer time since that is his preferred activity. So, we'll go through that as we go through the bit here. So, behaviors of concern, again, just coming right off of the functional behavior analysis or assessment. So the second box is asking us if the behavior of concern is a skill deficit or performance deficit. Sometimes it's both. So we know that there are skills that he's lacking, but we also know that he has some of the skills. He just does not perform them consistently or doesn't perform them under certain conditions. So sometimes it is both, but it does only let us choose one. I chose performance deficit because, again, with Tommy's intellectual level, with his intelligence, he does know when we discuss some of these things in social skills, he knows the right answer. He knows what he should do. He just doesn't perform it consistently or can't perform it sometimes because of his anxiety. Has the alternative behavior been observed? Yes, and we identified this in the FBA, so this is just a summary of those. So we know that he's able to identify and verbalize his emotions. We know that once he is calmed down after an incident, he's able to focus on a task and work. We know that when his work is preferred or of a topic of interest, he's more likely to attend to his work and comply. And at times, he was able to attend to a task and use work time to work when technology was not being used. So when he doesn't have that opportunity to wander from the work sites that he's supposed to be on. And when he has a teacher that's attending to him and prompting him through his work. Can the alternative replacement behavior be elicited by offering the appropriate reinforcement? So here we said yes. He is more likely to comply with work when he is able to earn computer time for completing work. However, it is difficult for him to transition off of the computer when it's time for him to be done. There was an incident during our intervention time with this reinforcement system where one day he just didn't want to get off the computer because he was so engrossed in the game that he was playing that he had earned by doing some work. And he physically took the computer and kind of held it between his arms and grasped it tightly and refused to let the computer go, hid in a corner with it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. It does work to get him to comply with some work demands. However, the transition piece off of it is difficult. So we're still working through exactly what that reinforcement piece looks like. And that is why we talk about this document being a working document. So we have an intervention in place, we have a reinforcement schedule in place that has started working, but we may need to tweak that. At some point in time, we may need to perhaps offer some taking away some minutes of his computer time if he does not transition when it's appropriate. So we may have to do some what we call cost response. Um, and that just may be something that we have to go to. At this time, we're not doing that because we're trying to increase the pro-social behaviors and the compliant behaviors. So we're not trying to put in any sort of punishment for that. But at some point in time, we may need to enforce that cost response. Okay, so baseline, again, taken directly from the FBA. So take just a minute here to refamiliarize yourself with our two baseline statements. So we want him to demonstrate emotional regulation skills as described there in the operational definition. He's currently doing that 64% of academic time. Notice I said academic time. This is during class. We are not monitoring him during recess, during lunch, um, any of those other kind of non-structured, non-academic times, because he is not at this time showing behaviors during those times. We're not seeing the concern there. And then presented with work and a reasonable time frame that he is using his time effectively and completing work. Currently, he's doing that on 33% of all given assignments. Okay, from there I have created two behavior goals. So we know what his behavior currently looks like. Now we want to talk about what it should look like. And here is where on the FBA video I talked about flipping his behavior when I talk about his baseline to the positive. That is just something that I like to do because it helps me think in terms of a goal. But again, we can always write it on the negative and just reverse the percentage, or if it's a frequency count, whatever your data score is there. So since I've talked about this in the positive, it was easy for me to write this into a goal. So the goals that we are writing for this behavior intervention plan, again, I have two baselines. So I've written two goals. So I measured these in 36 weeks, so during a full school year's time. When presented with a work task, there's my condition. Tommy will demonstrate emotional regulation skills. And here's my operational definition: asking for a short break if needed, saying okay and starting on his work, refraining from screaming, grunting, growling, complying with work or directives from the teacher, staying in his assigned area, and being safe with materials on an average of 90% of academic time for 9 consecutive weeks. So there's that criteria right there. How long do we want to see him do it for? I want to know that he can do that for a full quarter before I feel confident saying that he has mastered that skill and that we can move on to something else. Maybe it is increasing the work demand. Maybe it's asking him to do this more than 90% of the time, but we would need to make a change there once he's met that goal. The second goal in 36 weeks, so again, a full academic school year, when presented with a work task and setting a reasonable time frame with the teacher's help. So again, there's that intervention piece that we talked about, the condition of working with the teacher to set a goal for a time frame. Tommy will use his time effectively to work and complete the assignment on time, an average of 65% of the time for 8 out of 9 weeks. Now, the reason that I did this for 8 out of 9 weeks instead of like 9 consecutive weeks is that we know that there may be a week here and there where Tommy just does not get his work, all of his work turned in on time, or even 65% of his work turned in on time. I know because of his history of absences that can sometimes be tricky for him. And when we talk about these two different goals, emotional regulation skills, we want to see that very, very consistent before I know that Tommy's got it down and he's ready to move on to something else. Emotional regulation, if students don't have good emotional regulation skills, that's something that can be very disruptive to class. It can be dangerous depending on what their behavior looks like. Whereas if he's not completing his work on time, he's just not going to earn his reward. So those are kind of, we're not really comparing apples to apples there. So if I can see him do that for 8 out of 9 weeks, then I know that maybe then I can increase the demand of wanting him to complete those assignments on time 65% of the time. Maybe I want him now to move to 80% of the time. Maybe I want to keep him at 65% of the time, but I'll want him to be able to set a reasonable time frame for himself independently. So sometimes we just change those conditions once the student has met the goal, but we still need to keep working on the goal itself. It may just look a little different. So I hope that makes sense. So these are the two goals that we've set for Tommy. Okay, that implementation plan. So how are we going to reach those goals? What are we going to put in place for Tommy to help him be successful to reach those goals? So the first one is a visual schedule in Tommy's planner, which is something that he has, and we know that that has helped him be successful. A checklist provided of work to do. So when he's in study hall, when he is, sometimes he just has to use some of his own time to work. Giving him a checklist will help him see the visual of what he needs to get done. Time with the teacher when each task is presented to set a reasonable time frame goal for each assignment given. So again, that's part of that intervention period that we did see be fairly successful. Now he didn't always complete his work within the time frame set, but it appeared to encourage him to work towards the goal. So we did see increased time on task, even though he may not have completely met the goal of getting the work done in the time frame given. Use of a break card, which allows Tommy to take 3 minutes away from a task to collect his thoughts. And for that, he uses an individual timer. So, since his primary function is to escape work, we don't want to give him too many breaks or breaks for too long. And we want to specify what the breaks are for. So sometimes Tommy likes to use the excuse of, I'm stuck, or I don't know, or I'm thinking. So rather than having him sit with a piece of paper in front of him or a work assignment in front of him and just use the excuse while staring off into space is, I'm thinking, I'm thinking, I'm thinking. We give him 3 minutes, and the goal during that 3 minute break is to collect his thoughts, clear his mind so that his brain is ready for learning and putting his attention to the required task. So those are things that are explicitly taught to him, what the break is used for and what he's to do during that break time. A designated spot in the classroom for taking breaks and calming. So because we know that he likes to leave the classroom, or what we call elope, he'll just take off out of the classroom if he's frustrated, or sometimes he just goes wherever in the classroom. He'll run across the room and sit under a different desk. He's very tiny for a fifth grader, so he can fit in the side cubbies of the desks, and he likes to hide there or in lockers. So since he's trying to escape, or take a break or time out from where he's at, we want to be able to give him that, but under our conditions. So we're going to set a specific designated spot for him to be able to do those things. A visual toolkit. So a visual toolkit for him just looks like a list of coping skills or tools that we use for different emotions. So, for example, when he's feeling nervous, a list of strategies or coping skills that he can access to help him deal with that emotion. When he's feeling overwhelmed, some coping strategies or some skills, or what we would call tools, to help him kind of get back to baseline, feeling better and ready to learn. And we have that presented visually for him. The 3 sticky note system for work compliance. So sometimes Tommy just refuses to work despite our best effort to encourage him to work or to offer reinforcement for work. Sometimes there are just times when Tommy is not having it, he's not going to work. When he does that, when he's just blatantly refusing, and typically when he refuses, we hear that, no, I'm not doing it, and just kind of shut down. A lot of times, head goes down on the desk, or he'll push his paper on the floor. So when he's blatantly refusing to work, the 3 sticky note system will be put in place. So we talked about that a little bit before, but his sticky note system is that he is given 3 sticky notes on his desk. A prompt is given to remind him of what his work task is and to get started on the assigned task. He has 1 minute wait time between prompts, and then each time that Tommy refuses to start working, a sticky note is taken. Once all of them are removed, he has to work in the office. Again, he is escaping from class, but he is not escaping his work. So we're just setting different conditions for him at that time. So he has to work in the office. And if that means that he works through his lunch, through his recess, through his specials time, he is also a student that does extracurriculars like band and choir, but those come second to work. So if he's not completing his work, then he will have to miss out on those extracurriculars. Behavior specific praise, so offering him praise when he is doing the right thing. A ratio of 5 to 1 positive to negative responses. He does get very down on himself and he is hard on himself. That anxiety piece plays a part there. So making sure that we're as positive as we can be with him. And sometimes it's finding even the little list of things to be positive about. When he's having a really rough day and just not wanting to complete any work, the minute we see him pick up his pencil, we praise him for that. Great job, Tommy. You picked up your pencil. I see that you're ready to write. Now, oftentimes he'll put his pencil down to show that he's not ready to write, but we just keep encouraging those behaviors, especially on days that are tough. Use of visual and gestural prompts as much as possible over verbal prompts. This is especially helpful when he is escalated or when he's upset. Talking to him when he is upset, he verbalizes very well that I can't think. I don't want you to talk to me. I mean, he will tell us exactly what he's feeling. So being able to use visuals or gestures to point to what we need him to do, or point back to a direction, or point back to his work task, those are just more helpful than verbal prompts. It takes away the opportunity for him to argue or offer a verbal rebuttal. And then work chunked into smaller, manageable pieces. So sometimes Tommy looks at an assignment and it's no big deal. He knows he's very intelligent and he'll look at it and say, oh, this is an easy task for me. But he can also turn around and look at the same assignment 10 minutes later and it looks like an impossible task to complete. And we don't really know what triggers that. That sometimes it seems unmanageable to him and sometimes it doesn't. But when we notice that that is a trigger for him, we would chunk that work into smaller parts. We can do that by drawing a line on the paper to show him just complete this part first, and we'll go to the next part when you're done. Folding the paper in half, cutting the paper in half, maybe sometimes. However, we want to chunk that up for him, but just make it look smaller and make it look more manageable to him. So that's a prevention strategy. As far as teaching alternative behaviors or skills, so Tommy will be taught the following skills. These are the things that we're working on specifically in social skills with him. Emotional regulation skills with an emphasis in using different coping strategies or tools when feeling different emotions. So we know that he's really good at recognizing his emotions and he's really good at verbalizing those, but he's not really sure what to do with them when he's feeling them. So this is where we want to put into place the use of different coping strategies and tools that he can match up with the emotions that he's feeling, and we can find different strategies and explore different tools or strategies to help him get back to that baseline level. The use of a break card for Tommy when he needs a short timeout from work tasks. So usually when he needs a timeout, he's frustrated. What we know about Tommy's communication is the more frustrated he gets, the more he stutters, and the harder it is for him to say what he needs or what he means. So, using a break card can eliminate the language for him and eliminate some of that frustration. So, we need to teach him again specifically what the break card is, how he uses it, how he accesses the break, why he accesses a break, what the break looks like, and also how to transition out of break. So those are all different things that he needs. And how long is break too. So all of those things that we teach, we don't just teach him when you need a break, use this card. We really have to, again, kind of task analyze that and think about all of the different questions he may have about a break and all of the different steps we would teach him to take a break. The next one is prioritizing work using a checklist and work due dates. So I said that's something that we were working on in our small group social skills class, is looking at work, trying to figure out what's due first, what do I have time to complete, and coming up with a checklist by work due date so that he can prioritize his work and figure out what to work on first. We have found that Tommy doesn't always, I don't want to say not get encouraged to complete work at home, but oftentimes, even though mom and dad know that he has late work, it doesn't always seem to be a priority at home either. So we're trying to teach him how to prioritize and gain some of those skills so that he can do them independently and he feels the intrinsic motivator behind being able to complete something by a deadline. The next one is organization skills with the use of a visual of supplies needed for each class. So that is something that we put in place and it worked well for him. So we want to make sure that we continue to just brush up and reinforce those skills. Appropriate response strategies. So specifically responding to adults when frustrated using a calm tone and an appropriate voice level. So not only does he need to know how to regulate his emotions, but when he's frustrated and he's responding to an adult, he needs to make sure that he's doing so in a way that is not disrespectful or come across as disrespectful. Those skills will be taught by the following. So, currently, we're doing about 25 minutes in the afternoon of social skills instruction. That will move to 30 minutes of daily social skills with an emphasis in the above skills in a small group setting. One on one instruction as needed as situations occur during the school day to reinforce the above skills. And skills will be taught in an explicit direct instruction model with opportunities for modeling, practice, and role playing situations that mirror situations that may occur in the classroom. So, all of these things will help teach and reinforce the skills that are listed above. Okay, response strategies. So, there are a variety of response strategies here. The first one is using a visual or gestural prompt to be used to redirect Tommy to an assigned task when he's refusing to work, grunting, growling at a teacher, saying no. So, kind of those blatant refusal behaviors. And when we see that he is escalated, taking the verbal out of it and giving different types of prompts to help redirect him. Also describes the sticky note system, which is described above, but that is a response strategy for when he is non-compliant with his work and refusing. When Tommy is working, the teacher will increase praise and implement his reward system. When Tommy is working during assigned work times and demonstrating emotional regulation, the teacher will give him a tally on his chart. The teacher will determine when to give the tallies and use them as ways to motivate Tommy. So, an example of that would be on a day where Tommy is having increased difficulty regulating his emotions, or maybe working on more non preferred tasks, or just a day where he's kind of in a mood and not wanting to work. That might be a day where we increase the amount of tallies given to help motivate him and encourage him to do his work. Tallies will be totaled up, and those will be able to be cashed in for earned computer time at the end of each day as long as his work is finished. So um, another important piece of that is making sure again that he's meeting our conditions. If he does not have his work completed, then he would need to wait to cash that computer time, and he would need to use that time to do his work. So another motivator there for him to get his work done on time. As far as the safety plan goes, and next week when we meet, we'll talk specifically about safety plans and what those look like. But for Tommy, really the only concern of safety is when he leaves the room and a teacher is unable to track him to see where he goes. Sometimes that's because the teacher has several other students in the room or because he runs away and we're not able to find him. If that happens, the office would be called to help locate Tommy and get him back to the class safely, or to the office if he is not able to be returned to class safely. So if he's escalated, if he's screaming and very distraught, that might be a time where he goes to the office, which is used as a place for him to go when he's not able to be successful in the classroom. And then the last piece of this is the monitoring plan. So the monitoring plan is all about how we're going to monitor all of the pieces of his behavior intervention plan. So the first one is how we're going to monitor the goal. So we're going to monitor the goal, or in this case, goals, for Tommy's behavior plan. These goals are actually going to be the same goals written in his IEP under the area of behavior. So he will have two behavior goals. Even though he is a student who, again, is identified as a student who is talented and gifted, he will also be on an IEP. We call these students twice exceptional students. So he's exceptional in the fact that he is well above his peers in the area of academics, at least one grade level above, if not more. He's also exceptional because he demonstrates some pretty significant skill and performance deficits in the area of behavior. So while it's not extremely common that you see students who fall under both categories, it is something that we do see from time to time. So Tommy is what we would consider a twice exceptional student. So even though he's a talented and gifted student, he will have an IEP in the area of behavior, and both of the goals listed above will be his behavior goals on his IEP, along with his communication goal. So if the team decides on those goals, that is what will be written. And the way we will monitor those is by using the daily behavior recording form, and that will look like the emotional regulation piece, the task completion piece, and the time management piece, which were on the forms that I showed during the FBA. We will not monitor the organization and materials piece because we saw that part kind of weed itself out as we put interventions into play. So those will be recorded on the form to monitor his emotional regulation and work completion time management. Percentage of weekly totals will be recorded on the IEP. So just as we did the weekly percentages on his baseline on the data forms, um, once we put the behavior plan in place, those goals would continue to be averaged weekly and the totals would be recorded on the IEP. We need to determine the frequency of monitoring and the person responsible for the monitoring. So, daily in all academic classes is when we're completing the monitoring because, again, remember, we're not monitoring him during recess, lunch, other unstructured times. And it would be the classroom teacher and the special education teacher who would be responsible for monitoring those areas. And I put classroom teacher down because it's not always just one teacher. He does have another science teacher that he goes to. If he would switch out of the LP class for any reason, it would be up to whichever teacher he's in at that time. That teacher is the one that's going to be recording at the end of the class period whether or not he was able to demonstrate emotional regulation or whether or not he turned in the assignment on time that he was given. And then the special education teacher's job, which would be me, my job would be to make sure that that data is collected every week, that I average it, and I get it on the IEP. I will also be monitoring him during the social skills instruction since that instruction will come directly from me. The next piece is how will we monitor the alternative or replacement behavior? So, how will that growth be monitored? So that growth will be monitored here since he will be completing daily social skills instruction in my classroom. That will be monitored during our period of specially designed instruction, that 30 minutes that we will do every day. His progress in the above skills will be monitored, and individual instruction, when needed, will be documented on his chart. So when we think of that individualized instruction piece, that's when I have to kind of stop, or the teacher has to stop what they're doing and redirect him and reteach those behaviors. So those are things that we want to watch out for. If we're having to constantly teach him in a one-on-one setting how to use appropriate response, then that tells me that we're not meeting that replacement behavior goal and that we need to reinforce those skills during social skills instruction. So that will be done daily during social skills instruction by the special education teacher. And then the last part is the BIP implementation. So how will the components of the behavior intervention plan be monitored? So by law, in the state of Iowa, you are required to review the behavior intervention plan at least once a year. Again, since this is a working document, that does not mean that you wait until the year's time to review that. But for some students in some situations, that is perfectly acceptable. For some, you may need to meet sooner than that to make changes to the plan as problems arise. So if Tommy's behavior goal warrants a need for a change, the team will meet again to determine any necessary changes in the plan. So you have to let the data drive those decisions. And how often will that be monitored? It will be monitored at least once a year, and that will be monitored by the special education teacher and the IEP team because we're not going to make changes to the behavior intervention plan or any parts of the IEP without the IEP team meeting. So those are the parts of Tommy's behavior intervention plan. And I hope that you found watching these two videos helpful and insightful and gave you kind of another look at what creating an FBA and a BIP can look like. I look forward to reading your reflections. Have a great week.